In the heart of 19th century Yoruba land, the gods grew silent, but the drums did not. And when the drums speak, men must listen. This is not just a war story. It is a haunting of blood and brass, of spirits and sovereignty. Subscribe to Folklore Frontier, where legends breathe and fear never sleeps. Yoruba land was once ruled by the mighty Oyo Empire, but by the 1800s, Oyo had collapsed like a termite-infested palace. From its ruins rose new contenders, Ibadan chiefdoms, with war in their blood and a hunger for power sharper than any spear. Ibadan was not a kingdom, it was a war machine, forged by mercenaries, greedy for tribute, hungry for more. In Okemesi, a town nestled near sacred groves, injustice spilled blood that could not be washed away. An Ibadan agent disrespecting the town's sacred festival struck a priestess in public. Her screams echoed through the hills. That was the mistake. Fabunmi of Okemesi was no ordinary warrior. He was a vessel, and something ancient had filled him. That night, Fabunmi and his rebels struck. They slaughtered the Ibadan agents and desecrated their outposts. Blood spilled on sacred ground. The gods didn't whisper, they roared. The killing was a spark, but the forest was already dry. Idesha and Ekiti towns had suffered under Ibadan's rule, levied, raided, and insulted. Now they answered Fabunmi's call. In hidden groups, under moonless nights, war oaths were sworn. The Ekiti-Parapo Confederacy was born, a ghost alliance of towns once divided, now united under vengeance. This was no longer just rebellion, it was prophecy. Ibadan laughed, let them come. They said, we will crush them before the gods blink twice. But the gods did blink, and when they opened their eyes, Yoruba land was burning. In the land of talking drums, the loudest voice belongs to the dead, and the dead were calling for war. The drum led them to Imesili, not a capital, a threshold. Between the world of kings and the realm of spirits, Imesili became the heart of the Ekiti-Parapo alliance. But it wasn't chosen for its defenses. It was chosen because in ancient times, it was said to be the crossing place of the dead. Here, armies didn't just march, they invoked. The leaders came from all corners: Ijebu, Ifaki, Ijesha. Their eyes were wary, their tongues suspicious, but Fabunmi was their fire, and beside him, a mysterious figure emerged, Ogedengbe of Ilesha. Some say Ogedengbe was not born, that he walked out of a lightning strike, that the gods stitched him together with rods. He was a strategist, a prophet, and a terrifying voice at war councils. Together with Fabunmi, they molded a ragtime force of towns into a disciplined, divine army. They called on Ogun, god of war. They called on Orunmila, keeper of faith. They even invoked Eshu, the trickster, to confront their enemies. And their weapons, they weren't all steel. They crafted Ofe, bullets that struck targets by name. Charms were woven into tonics, some to deflect iron, some to blind enemies' cows. They were even whispers of warriors, possessed mid-battle, speaking in tongues. Imesili was no longer just a base, it was a haunted forge. Ibadan did not sit idle. They marched, arrogant and sure. Veterans from dozens of city-state battles, ruthless, unrelenting. But their arrogance was a chink in their armor. At the Battle of Ikino, the Ekiti-Parapo struck with fury and cunning. They drew the enemy in with forced retreats. They crushed them with hidden archers and guerrilla tactics. Ibadan lost men, they lost ground, and worse, they lost fearlessness. But victory was not without its price. Villages vanished, fields burned, spirits displaced. For every Ibadan war camp destroyed, 100 Yoruba families wandered the forest, starved and cursed. And from across the sea, the white shadows watched. The British perched in Lagos were not blind. They saw an opportunity in chaos. Divide, mediate, then dominate. Letters were sent, spies dispatched, treaties drafted in invisible ink, and soon guns began arriving on both sides. At Imesile, the lines had been drawn, but the war was no longer just about land. It was about memory, and memory bliss. It began not with thunder, but with silence. The kind of silence that comes when even the gods turn their faces away. In the early days of the Kiriji War, battles blurred into seasons, crops died, rain stopped, markets emptied, and in their place, war chants echoed across the east. The Ibadan army struck first, swift and brutal. They moved like a blade, slicing through towns loyal to the Ekiti-Parapo. But these weren't unguarded villages, they were traps, planted landmines disguised as a secret idols. Even messengers carried false messages just to lure Ibadan warlords into spiritual ambush. The Parapo had learned from past defeats. They built stone cities beneath shrines, planted landmines disguised as secret idols. Even messengers carried false messages just to lure Ibadan warlords into spiritual ambushes. At the Battle of Jalumi, Ibadan suffered a rare humiliation. Their general's horse was found impaled, still breathing, eyes wide with terror. Ogedembe, now the spiritual arts of the Parapo, began performing Aje rites, ancient ceremony forbidden even by traditional standards. Some claimed he could speak to the Iwin, forest spirits of the dead. Others whispered he was no longer a man but a vessel. Meanwhile, the British intensified their invisible war. They gave muskets to both sides, and they smiled as Yoruba sons spilled each other's blood. A house divided, they said, is a house we can own. Fabunmi, once a firebrand, now bore the weight of hundreds of lost lives. He saw what the war was becoming, not liberation, not revenge, but an endless cycle bleeding into itself. And even yet, even as Ibadan retreated in key battles, a new threat crept from the north, the Fulani of Ilorin. These weren't allies, they were vultures. Ilorin's emirate forces moved with silence, cruelty, exploiting the chaos. Sometimes they fought the Parapo, sometimes the Ibadan, but always they abducted, they raided, they vanished. Now Lagos stepped in, proposing peace talks, but peace in the colonial tongue had another meaning. Surrender your right to rule yourselves. But many leaders, weary and heartbroken, agreed, but others, Fabunmi included, refused. He would rather die in the forest of Okemesi than kneel before forged ink and fake treaties. The war dragged on. 16 years of fire, of betrayals, of prayers that turned to curses. No side truly won, and every side lost pieces of their soul. They called it the Kiriji War, but it was more than a war. It was a miracle, and when Yoruba people looked into it, they saw what was stolen, what was broken, and what could never be returned. The gods had long since gone quiet, and the drums had stopped beating. In 1893, the Kiriji War reached its unnatural end, not with a final battle, but with ink, with foreign signatures, with British hands shaking Yoruba ones, while loading gunboats behind their back. Fabunmi of Okemesi, the once unstoppable warrior, was no longer a lion. He had become something else, a memory, one that haunted both the living and the land itself. He did not attend the final treaty. Some say he was poisoned. Others claim he walked into the Osun River and became part of it. The treaty, brokered by Sir Gilbert Carter, the British governor of Lagos, was painted as peace, but beneath every smiling photograph was the stench of colonial conquest. The British didn't just stop the war, they rewrote it. The Ekiti-Parapo Confederacy was dissolved, Ibadan's dominance was neutralized, and with one treaty, the dream of a united self-ruling Yoruba alliance died quietly. What really ended was not just the fighting, but the ancient war that gave the Yoruba their rhythm, their cosmos, their ancestral strength. The shrines that once blessed warriors were bulldozed, their oracles silenced, the drums forbidden. From these ashes, Nigeria would eventually be born, a name with no gods, no ancestors, just borders and British profit. The blood of the Kiriji War didn't just soak the soil, it fertilized colonialism. There were no statues for the fallen, no parades for the warriors, just stories, whispers passed down from elder to child, like embers in the dark. Don't forget Fabunmi. Don't forget the day the spirit stopped answering. Don't forget how the white men ended our war with paper and prayer. But stories you see are not truly silent. And in towns like Okemesi and Ijebu, storms still live fooled by war shrines. They say the gods of Kiriji still walk the night. Some claim you can hear the chants in the wind. If you dare to walk alone during a blood moon, the spirits of Kiriji are not resting, because they were not defeated, only paused, waiting, watching, for a generation that will remember not just what was lost, but what was stolen. This was not just a war, it was a warning. Remember Kiriji, speak the names they buried, subscribe to Folklore Frontier, where legends breathe and fear never sleeps.